You know, it's kind of funny because I am a little bit nervous about reading, despite the fact that I know almost every single person here. So this is my new book, from which I'm very proud.
Woohoo!
Yeah. It's a collection. It's sort of a retelling of Peter Pan. It's sort of a dark retelling of Peter Pan, and I wrote it. I began the collection Christmas Eve 2009 when I realized I didn't really have a good Christmas present for my mom. And that's sort of a Peter Pan kind of moment right then, because Peter Pan's all about mothers and sort of about disappointment and what it means to grow up. Yeah, it's all about what it means to grow up and and the kind of tiny cruelties I think that we do to one another while we grow up. And so the poems that I'm going to read from this are sort of a triptych of poems about Mrs. Darling and what her experiences are as she sort of sees her children growing up and as they sort of disappear to go off to Never Never Land. So I'll start with those. Every morning, Mrs. Darling collects the clothes discarded about the children's room. Wendy's frock and sashes, John's muddied uniform, Michael's socks, so tiny they curl up like kittens in the palm of her hand. Every afternoon, Mrs. Darling looks over these objects. She washes, irons, folds and tends to tears. Some days, Mrs. Darling remarks upon the laundry, a shirt suddenly too small, a sock mended once too many times. She looks upon her washing, ironing, her folding hands, feels the too tight skin. She knows she is growing older, and she fears the tightness of her skin, and alternately its looseness, the wrinkled folds. Some evenings, as she darns Michael's worn socks, she pulls the fraying yarn. She unravels the heel and the toe. Slowly. Some evenings, she imagines tugging out the blue veins of her hand, laying them in a neat pile while her arms, shoulders, neck slowly undo themselves. It is midnight, and the children sleep, pieces of their daily life tucked quietly away in drawers and closets. Mrs. Darling peers in through the window. The grandfather clock chimes and Michael stirs, drowsily turns, exhales. It is already tomorrow. With the children gone, the house no longer breathes. There are no tantrums, no sword fights and pretending, no dinner time lectures, no stories. Mrs. Darling sits at the table, hands folded like a laundered shirt, and waits. When Mr. Darling enters, she does not look up. She disdains the steps of daily living. Today, Mr. Darling has stitched on his paling wife with a sewing needle. Now she follows him to work, drinks coffee as he does, reads the newspaper. As one they rise from the table, as one they mount the stairs, past the empty room on the left. She knows something is wrong, but Mrs. Darling can no longer remember the weight of her own body. It is easier for her to live in this darkness. Once upon a time, there was no Mrs. Darling. There was a space where she used to be that sat cold and empty like a furnace gone out. Mr. Darling could hardly remember, forgot her more and more each day. His heart was a cabinet of curiosities, so many things missing. He cradles a child's finger bone to his chest, a stuffed crocodile, the scale of a fish. He can't tell where they belong now, only that some kind of natural history has vanished, and without it the world is chaotic, brutal. Once upon a time there was no Mrs. Darling, and when the children crowd through the bedroom window, no one greets them. Michael begins to cry. He doesn't know why, only that the room is strange and dark. Wendy hushes him, takes his hand and draws him close. It is only Peter who knows that all mothers are make-believe. Come away, there is no one here. Wendy touches the bedspread. It is neat and folded. This means nothing to her. The last poem I'll read was published in one of the Riesling anthologies, so it was sort of originally written separate from this collection, but it ties in so nicely that it sort of brings together the sort of fairy tale themes of what Peter Pan is. There is no mist in the city, no sparks that flicker beyond your gaze like the eyes of the first woman you loved. Electricity has replaced fireflies as the primary source of light. Who needs a trail of breadcrumbs to navigate the London Tube? There are easier ways to travel than in a house on chicken legs at 7 leagues astride. Your shadow has escaped you, and without a needle and thread it shall roam free. It knows her, the first woman you loved, knows how to find her braid of hair dangling from the 10th story window, knows the name to call. One night, perhaps, you shall turn a corner to see them dancing, his hand upon her hip. He is sharper in her gaze, and though you trace his steps, the steps you learn together, her smile is only for him. You are but a shadow cast upon the street. So thanks very much. This was a lot of fun. I have copies of the book available here, and I also have some postcards that have the fantastic art by Chris Roberts, who was really just an absolute joy to work with, and some of the poems on the back. So thanks.